Justin Goodman is the Senior Vice President of Advocacy and Public Policy at White Coast Waste, the nonpartisan nonprofit organization I just got done heralding and explaining. It exposed and has held Dr. Fauci accountable for many things, including funding the Wuhan lab, as well as testing, cruel, gratuitous, and pointless testing on dogs generally and beagles specifically. For more than 2 decades, Justin has led successful and award-winning grassroots and lobbying campaigns to end cruel taxpayer-funded experiments on dogs, cats, primates, and other animals. I've long been an admirer of that group and of his work, and we're really delighted to have him join us tonight. Justin, it's great to see you. Thanks so much for coming on.
It's an honor to be here. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Absolutely. I can say the same to you. All right. So before we get into the specifics of what happened today, what this program was about, other programs that you've been working on, I want to talk a little bit about your organization because, you know, so many political advocacy groups, when they get into their work, say, oh, we're going to try and make this so that it's not a right-wing issue. It's not a left-wing issue. It doesn't matter right or left. It's just, you know, the cause is just and it should unite everybody. Everyone says that. Very few groups succeed in actually doing that. And yet, as the reaction to your victory today demonstrates, with huge numbers of people across the political spectrum in Washington, you know, MAGA people and traditional Republicans and centrists, a few liberals as well, celebrating this victory in all sorts of ways, what has your plan been in order to accomplish that, and why do you think you've succeeded where others have failed?
That's a great question. I mean, White Coat was started over a decade ago by my friend, my boss, the founder of our group, Anthony Bellotti, who came out of Republican politics. And actually, the way he got involved in this issue to begin with is he worked in a taxpayer-funded animal laboratory as a teenager. He thought he wanted to go to medical school, and he got an internship at a local hospital in New York City. Didn't know what the job was going to be. It turns out it was a lab that was torturing pigs and cardiac experiments, and he quit after a few weeks. He was just horrified by what he saw. Went into politics and ended up working on a number of high-profile defund campaigns and connected the dots. He was like, oh my God, I could be using the same strategies and tactics that the GOP is using to defund other programs they don't like to attack government animal testing, because a lot of people don't realize that the U.S. government is the single largest funder of animal testing, not only in the country, in the world. About $20 billion of our tax money is spent each year, wasted each year on animal experiments. So he had this idea for a new organization that brought the issue back to the center where it belongs. This is, you know, ending animal experimentation didn't begin as a liberal issue. It was actually a very, very bipartisan issue. It goes back 150 years in the United States, and it was always something that attracted people from all ends of the political and social spectrum. But because of the nature of the organizations that ended up kind of commandeering it in the 70s and 80s and 90s, like PETA, it became a very far left issue that people on the center and right just did not identify with. It was associated with organizations that wanted to ban and tax everything, and that they saw as, food police, gun grabbers. And as a result, issues that could get traction across the political spectrum, like animal testing, which is truly a nonpartisan issue, it was getting caught up in kind of the people's concerns about the broader animal rights agenda, and rightfully so. We live in a very diverse country. 1% of the country is vegan. Most people aren't. So how do you meet everyone else where they're at? And the idea was to unite folks. We like to say liberty lovers and animal lovers. So people who are concerned with animal welfare, people who are concerned with government waste, or folks who are concerned about both, and bring them together to make some actual change for animals in laboratories. Because despite 50 years of work by establishment groups, the number of animals in labs had gone up. The amount of money that was being wasted by the government in labs had gone up. So we saw an opportunity to really break in there and widen the tent, create a group that had no litmus test and a fanatically single issue focus on just getting animals out of government labs. So as an organization, our position is we don't want to ban animal testing. Most of it's taxpayer funded. We'll cut the funding for the 2/3 of animal testing in this country that is paid for by taxpayers. And then the challenge to them is let the private sector fund it. And guess what? They're not going to. No private company or foundation in their right mind is going to pay to put puppies on treadmills and give them heart attacks until they collapse. I mean, the type of things that the government's funding when it has no return on investment for a company or for public health, so no one's going to pay for it. So that was our challenge. And we were able to then unite people, small government folks who wanted to cut spending and also liked animals, with more traditional people on the left who wanted to get animals out of laboratories and bring them together and build this very robust bipartisan coalition of people in the Freedom Caucus, the Squad, and everyone in between to fight against government-funded animal tests.
I want to talk about the specifics of this kind of last standing program that you helped pressure the government to close, and specifically we obviously have a new set of officials at HHS, including RFK Jr. and Dave Baratara at NIH. But I just want to focus a little bit more on the kind of reason why this succeeded, because, I've been around for a long time watching Washington and advocacy groups, and these kinds of wins really don't come easily. And when they happen, they're often a byproduct of very well thought through and executed strategies. But there's also some component of it that, for whatever reason, breaks through all the other issues and activist groups. And I'm sort of interested in this one because, just my own personal experience growing up, I absolutely love dogs. I just had an affinity for them from the time I was very young. It opened up things for me that I don't think, that were difficult to open up, that maybe never would have had it been for dogs. And I always knew I wanted to have like a gigantic space with tons of rescue dogs, which I now have. So they always played an important part of my life. But what they also did was having this kind of love for dogs, this like appreciation for what it means to be a sentient being, this majesty that these animals possess. It's kind of like became the gateway for me to then thinking about other animals. I'd been a meat eater my whole life. I didn't care where the food was coming from. It's all hidden how it's made, so we don't think about it. But most people don't need to do any work to think about what pigs are, or what cows are, how sophisticated they are, or whatever, because they know they're dogs. So I'm wondering, do you think that was an important component of this? That this is not just like animal testing generically, but specifically testing on dogs, which most people have in their lives, and a breed of dogs that in the most sadistic way was chosen because of how trusting and loving they are in beagles?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, we can trace back the victory that was announced yesterday to at the very beginning of our campaign in 2016, focused on dogs. But I just want to say that's part of how White Coat launched, and that's why we chose focusing on dogs when we first put out our campaigns in 2016. Is we felt like as an organization that the big groups running the show at the time had kind of lost the plot. That they were all in on anti-speciesism and a rat is a mouse is a dog. And whether that's morally accurate or not, in real life, that's not how things are. We have a nation of dog lovers. 2/3 of this country has a dog or a cat in their household and considers them members of the family. And to build an effective social movement, sure, part of it's, idealistic thinking about what the world could be, but you also have to accept where it is and then find common ground with people to kind of build that future you want to see and not operate as if that's the way things are now. So we accepted that this is a nation of dog lovers, a nation of cat lovers, people who love their pets. So let's meet them where they're at and start there. A lot of the other groups have moved on and assumed that somehow the dog and cat issue would just fix itself and they can just work on mice and rat issues because there's many more of them in laboratories. And as a result, dogs and cats got left in the lurch and there was no one really advocating for them. So when we launched in 2016, we made a tactical and strategic decision to start, let's bring the focus to dogs. This is a way to bring people on the left, right, center together, bring people across this country together for fighting for a common cause. And we released a report called Spending to Death. And this was in November of 2016. It actually came out right after Trump was elected in the 2016 election. And we put out this report focusing on what the federal government was doing to dogs in its own laboratories. So to your point, the government funds a lot of animal experimentation in colleges, universities, private companies, but also conducts a lot of animal experimentation in its own laboratories. So we were focusing on what's the government doing in-house, thinking if we can make reforms there, then we can use that success to build a campaign to then apply those successes outwards towards these non-governmental targets like the colleges and universities that were getting government money. So we released this report, and two of the projects that we focused on back in 2016 were one, a program that was being done in Fauci's own laboratory in Washington, right outside of Washington, D.C. in Maryland, where they were covering beagle puppies in biting flies and then taking photographs of the lesions and wounds that the dogs are suffering from as a result. And these were maximum pain experiments, meaning it caused pain and distress to these dogs and then completely withheld pain relief intentionally. The other lab we focused on at the NIH was the lab that was just shut down, which was a septic shock laboratory. And this one had gone on for 40 years, killed over 2,100 puppies, according to our calculations and documents we got through FOIA. And what they were doing in that lab is that they would take bacteria that caused pneumonia, pump it into the puppy's lungs to make them sick, and then slice their arteries to cause them to bleed out and put them into septic shock, and then do experiments on them and see how many of the dogs would survive over 92 hours. A lot of them died, and the ones who survived were killed. And that went on for 40 years. So we've been fighting that specific laboratory for the last 9 years. Freedom of Information Act investigations, lawsuits against the NIH for records, grassroots campaigns. Over 1 million people wrote to Congress and the NIH asking for these tests to be cut, introducing legislation with members of Congress that targets this specific laboratory, writing letters to agencies, et cetera. And we were able to trick down the NIH laboratories to this very last lab. And we were told, Congress was told a month ago that not only was there still one active protocol, but they were actually intending on reviewing it and possibly approving it. So we were, disappointed that this project was still going on under the Trump administration, because President Trump, to his credit, and he doesn't certainly get enough credit for this, and a lot of people don't know this, is that I would argue that the first Trump administration made more progress to end animal testing than any other administration in history. If you look at USDA, we exposed the largest cat lab there. Trump shut it down. They shut down dog and cat testing at the VA. They shut down nicotine tests on primates at the FDA and sent all of the primates to a sanctuary in Florida. They retired cats from the USDA, some of them who live with our president now. So there was a lot of great progress. So we were disappointed. And then Elon Musk, Laura Loomer, and other folks started to jump in and say, Trump, why is this still going on? You've been in office 100 days now. You got to clean up, your own house before we start going after these other labs. And lo and behold, Sunday, Jay Bhattacharya went on Fox and Friends and announced that they were shutting down this laboratory.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, victories like that, after 90 days of the new administration in office, people often get excited with the new administration, the potential for it. But this victory was so complete, so decisive. It was Jay Bhattacharya sent out to announce it, the head of the NIH. I want to ask you a little bit more about sort of the effects of all of this, because I think a lot of people, one of the reasons why I became so interested in the suffering entailed in dog experiments was I was doing a lot of reporting on the indescribable evils, the moral evils and the spiritual rot that takes place in, I don't even like to call them farms, these industrialized warehouses where animals are kept and tortured and processed over the years. And I say that because I think, farming life, for all of its potential criticism, including that you kill an animal at the end to turn it into food, this is a big tradition, but they treat their animals well. They keep them outside in natural habitats. They feed them. They treat them well until it's time to go to the slaughterhouse. And that's the exact opposite of factory farms. I remember just kind of getting in this vista into animal experimentation when I did some reporting on these programs that are for beagles. And I think it's important for people to know, when they experiment on beagles, they're not buying them. Maybe sometimes they buy them, but oftentimes they're not buying them. They're not finding them on the street. They're not getting them from rescue shelters. A lot of these programs entail the government breeding beagles. So they're born in these labs. Their only reason for creating this life and bringing them into existence is to immediately subject them to some of the most horrific experimentation that personally I have trouble, even when I'm reporting on it, reading about and we're seeing about it or hearing about it. That's how sickening it is. And I think one of the things that we've learned about industrialized animal farms is that a lot of the people who work there end up being psychologically traumatized, because you have to see this cruelty and inflict this cruelty every day. And you watch a video where some dog gets kicked by somebody gratuitously, and if it goes on the internet, it viralizes and everybody's so enraged. How can how can anyone do that? And yet these people are doing that every day. Do you think there's, and sometimes I really do wonder, like, hey, how is it that these people get themselves to do that? Like, what do they do to justify it in their head? So I think there's often an assumption that well, there must be some medical value, medical necessity, where they can tell themselves, yeah, we wish we didn't have to do this, but at the end of the day, we ought to be prioritizing humans. And these kinds of horrific experiments, as torturous as they are what ends up saving lives. In other words, there's a medical necessity to them. Is that true?
No, absolutely not. And you have these agencies that are the top funders of animal experimentation, like the NIH, which is, again, the single largest funder of animal experimentation in the world, constantly lamenting the fact. And finally, we have someone in the Trump administration like Jay Bhattacharya acknowledging this publicly and very broadly, that animal experimentation is incredibly wasteful. There's a horrible return on investment for taxpayers, and obviously an incredible amount of suffering for animals for nothing. For no reason. The only people who benefit from animal experimentation are the ones lining their pockets and personally conducting it and making it's big business. Colleges and universities are raking in billions of dollars. College professors have built careers torturing dogs and other animals. And then you look at all the other kind of ancillary businesses that you're speaking about, like the puppy mills. There are puppy mills across this country that are subsidized with tax dollars specifically to breed beagles to be tortured and killed in experiments. Not only that, there's small-scale puppy mills at colleges and universities across the country where they intentionally breed beagles, Scotty dogs, Irish setters, other animals to suffer from deadly diseases from birth, to be physically deformed, to be blind, to suffer from hemophilia, where most of the babies are bleeding out because they get a small injury that can't heal. This is all stuff that's being funded with taxpayer dollars. So it's a big business, and people become invested in that from earlier in their career. And there's no incentive to innovate, because the second you solve a problem, your grant gets cut off. So what do? You just keep tinkering away forever and ever at the expense of taxpayers, at the expense of animals. You get your name on a plaque at your college or university, you get promoted, you publish papers, and you're heralded as a hero. There's a guy at the USDA who ran the largest cat lab, the one we exposed. They were flying to the wet markets in China, buying dog and cat meat, flying it back to the USDA, breeding kittens, and then force-feeding the kittens this cat meat in cannibalism experiments. They were doing this for decades. It cost $22 million. They killed thousands and thousands of kittens that they were breeding there. They put this guy in the USDA Hall of Fame. So there's incredibly perverse incentives for this community in biomedical research to torture animals, because you're heralded for it, you're rewarded for it, you're given a raise, you're promoted for it. And that's why the best solution, if you're talking about shutting down the labs, putting animal experimenters out of a job, shutting down these puppy mills, is cutting the money, because they're all subsidized by taxpayers and they couldn't possibly exist. And whether you're center, right, or left on the political spectrum, this is just the practical reality of this business, of this $20 billion plus a year business, is that it's propped up by taxpayers. And if you remove those subsidies, it's going to collapse.
You know, when I first started looking at the question, because I'm very open-minded when I started thinking about animal experimentation, I think there's always been an assumption that there must be some value to it. Even those very controversial ones where rabbits were blinded by cosmetics or perfumes, as horrific as that seemed to subject an animal to that level of suffering, people thought, well, it's what keeps, makeup or shampoo or perfume safe, and therefore, we want to prioritize humans. And I assume there was some component to that, at least with some of these things. And the more I looked at it, you know what it reminded me a lot of? In academia, everybody in every school around the country and in the world is pressured and required to publish some sort of whatever in a journal in order to get an academic job. The problem is it's not easy to find things that haven't already been written about in 1,000 times. That's just what academics are constantly doing. And so you can find these papers that are basically the same as things that have been written previously, only they'll very slightly change the date or the place where they're going in a way that adds nothing of value, but at least they can say that it's new and therefore get published. When the COVID pandemic happened, and as we know, we had all these epidemiologists telling Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci, look, this seems a lot like it was manipulated by scientists, that it probably leaked from the Wuhan lab, and within a week, he had every single one of them signing on to a Lancet letter saying, we know for sure it came from an animal to human leap, and not because, and that is basically racist misinformation to suggest it came from the Wuhan lab. I remember wondering, why would these established leading scientists be willing to jump on board with that? And of course, the answer is because between Francis Collins and Anthony Fauci, they basically control all government, all funding. If you want to be in a research lab, if you want to do medical research, those are the only ones who can basically fund it. And then the more I looked at this question of medical necessity, I was finding exactly what you were describing. You know, they would like take dogs at 3 months and subject them to some horrific disease for a year. And then the next time they would take dogs at 5 months and like subject them to the disease for 10 months. And they would keep getting grants every time they just tinkered with it and modified it slightly with no conceivable medical necessity to all these other studies. Is that, like, what is in the culture that permits that sort of thing to keep happening?
Well, I think people like Anthony Fauci are part of the problem. There is a culture of waste, fraud, and abuse and corruption at the NIH. The Wuhan lab is a great example of that. We were the first group to expose Fauci's funding for the Wuhan lab in April 2020. To your point, we were called racist conspiracy theorists and loonies. And then fast forward now, Joe Biden's intelligence agencies now believe that the lab leak caused COVID. And let's just remember, those experiments going on in Wuhan, and this is the reason why we got involved in investigating it, were animal experiments. They were going into the wild, capturing bats very far away, thousands of miles away from Wuhan, bringing them back to the laboratory, harvesting viruses from them, and then injecting those viruses into humanized mice who were genetically engineered mice and supercharging those naturally occurring coronaviruses to be extra dangerous to humans intentionally and extra transmissible to humans intentionally. There is literally no medical necessity or justification for that. That is bioweapons development. There would be absolutely no other reason to take a naturally occurring virus and soup it up in a laboratory in animal experiments to make it more deadly to people. The chances of a virus, the same virus, actually breaking out in nature that you created in a laboratory, the chances are astronomically small that you would create the same virus that nature is going to create. So instead, you end up with a human-made virus that could leak out and kill millions of people, and that's exactly what happened. Again, no medical necessity, no medical benefit, but you have lunatics running this agency who think that's actually a good use of our money. And that's why it's great that people like Fauci and Francis Collins are gone. However, Fauci's been gone since December 2022. His legacy is still alive and well at the NIH. One of his deputies just got appointed to be the new head of his division, a gain-of-function lunatic who at once ordered somebody to dig up a dead body to get the 1918 flu from this corpse to then supercharge in a gain-of-function experiment. This guy just got appointed the head of Fauci's old division, and we have lots of experiments that Fauci funded that have been renewed since Trump came into office. So we are thrilled that we wiped out the last dog lab inside the NIH, but there is a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse to clean up across this country that Fauci personally signed off on, put into motion, both in the United States and abroad, but there's no oversight of what's happening. So that's why we've been big fans of the slash and burn approach at the NIH. They just got, the White House just proposed a 40% budget cut for them, which is absolutely warranted after what happened in Wuhan and the cover-up that the government orchestrated. And then, of course, there was the government orchestrated the cover-up that you helped expose of Fauci's Beagle tests, where we had a long list of receipts, like a CVS receipt, from floor to ceiling, showing all of this evidence that Fauci had funded these sandfly experiments on beagles in Tunisia. And the Washington Post was fed misinformation by the NIH, saying it was fake news. They ran a cover story saying fake beagle research claims, when there was evidence the whole time that it was absolutely true. And they only made a culpa last year. So, you have these liars and losers and lunatics running the government who have no concern for public health, don't care at all about animals, only care about their careers and progressing and keeping their jobs and amassing power. And that's how you end up with a situation like this. So good riddance to Fauci, good riddance to Collins. And we're cautiously optimistic that Jay Bhattacharya is going to do more good at the NIH.
All right, come closer. I want to be very honest with you. It's kind of like a moment of candor here. I'm not somebody who loves going to the doctor. I know it's important, like the annual checkups and the lab and the blood work, but I really, in my mind, there's a huge part of my mind that was like, no, don't go. It's better to avoid it. I think we kind of all have that. Still, I do get peace of mind. I do understand why they matter. Like, you get kind of assurances You can catch things early that are treatable, whereas if you wait, they become much more dangerous. And even just making sure you're staying ahead of health stuff that runs in your family or that can be preventative. So there's obviously a lot of good reasons to go, but a lot of people do get nervous about labs and blood work results. And again, I totally understand why, but there's lots of things that you can do to work on your own health. And one simple lifestyle upgrade that we can all make is with a company that has been, I think, our earliest sponsor, one of the 2 or 3 earliest sponsors going back to when we launched the show. We have a great relationship with them. We've gotten to know the product. I really appreciate it. It's Field of Greens, which is a delicious, actually, doctor-formulated fruit and vegetable blend that you can just drink every day. People have a hard time preparing meals that are healthy, especially in this rush-pressured life. These are blends of fruit and vegetables that are designed to just give your body the nutrients that you need if you don't have time to prepare it or even eat it. It's so easy, you're gonna feel amazing. Plus, your doctor will notice your improved health or you get your money back. One Field of Greens customer wrote, quote, "The best blood work I've had in a decade. My doctor said, quote, whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Another said, quote, "For the first time in a year, my cholesterol numbers are normal." And a mom shared, quote, "After Field of Greens, my hair, nails, energy, and blood work are all better." What an interesting order she put that in. Her hair, her nails, her energy, and her blood work are all better. How can a fruit and vegetable drink promise better health? Because each fruit and vegetable in Field of Greens is doctor selected to support vital organs like your heart, your liver, your kidneys, your metabolism, immune system. It's not just like randomly put together. It helps all that, plus healthy blood cells. Let me get you started with 20% off and free shipping. Go to fieldofgreens.com and use my promo code Glenn. That's fieldofgreens.com, promo code Glenn. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.